Have you ever stayed alone in a classroom after everyone else had left? What if the sounds you heard weren't coming from another student at all? Tonight, we'll explore 7 disturbing true classroom horror stories that left students and teachers shaken. To protect privacy, names and certain details have been changed, but the stories themselves remain 100% real. Before we begin, tell us your location and current time in the comments. Subscribe to Unheard Fears, and let us know which story terrified you the most. She called me by a name only my mother used. Not my full name. Not the nickname my friends used. Not the shortened version my teachers defaulted to after the first week of school. The name she used was something my mother invented when I was maybe 3 years old. A soft, private thing, 2 syllables, the kind of name that only exists inside the walls of a specific house, spoken in a specific voice during specific moments. Moments like when I was sick, or scared, or when my mom was trying to get my attention from across a grocery store without shouting. Nobody at school knew it. I had never written it anywhere. It wasn't on an emergency contact form, a medical record, a birthday card left in a desk. It didn't exist in any document that had ever passed through a school office. She knew it. It was a Tuesday in November. Third period hadn't even fully settled. Kids were still pulling out binders. Someone in the back was eating chips they weren't supposed to have. The radiator near the window was doing that metallic ticking thing it always did when the heat first kicked on in the morning. Our regular social studies teacher was out sick. A substitute had been written on the whiteboard in blue marker, along with a page number and a chapter to read quietly. The substitute walked in and she was, in every visible way, completely unremarkable. Middle-aged, beige cardigan with small buttons down the front. Reading glasses on a cord around her neck that she hadn't put on yet. She carried a single manila folder, the kind with the metal clasp at the top, and she set it on the desk without opening it. She looked at the class once, slowly, the way a person looks at a room they've already memorized. Then she took attendance from a printed sheet she pulled from the folder. She moved through names quickly. Most substitutes stumble, they mispronounce things, they pause, they ask for clarification. She didn't pause once. She moved through every name with the ease of someone who had been calling this exact role for years. When she reached me, she looked up from the paper. She used that name. I remember the feeling before I remember the thought. A cold drop in my chest. Not fear exactly, more like the feeling of stepping off a curb you didn't see. My brain tried to rationalize it before I'd even consciously registered what happened. Maybe I misheard. Maybe it just sounded like it. Maybe she said something else and my brain filled in the rest. But I hadn't misheard. The kid sitting next to me, I'll call him Tobias, looked over at me with this small, confused expression, like he was waiting for me to react. He'd heard it too. I didn't say anything. I answered to it, which I still think about. I just said here like nothing happened because I was 12 and I didn't have a framework for what to do when something is wrong in a way that you can't name yet. Class continued. She gave us the chapter, walked slowly between the rows once, and then stood at the front in that still way of hers. Hands loosely clasped, not reading anything, not checking her phone like most substitutes did. Just watching. Halfway through the period, she looked up at Tobias and asked how his dog was doing. The class didn't react because it sounded like casual small talk, the kind of thing adults say to fill silence. But Tobias went completely still. He told me after class that his dog had been sick for 2 weeks. A tumor, the vet had found it, the family had been trying to figure out what to do, and he had told exactly one person at school, his best friend, in confidence 2 days before. His best friend wasn't in our social studies class. A few minutes later she said something to Priya, a girl in the 3rd row, about her grandmother. Asked whether she was settling in okay, whether the language barrier was making things difficult. Priya's grandmother had landed at the airport 4 days earlier, flying in from overseas to stay with the family for the first time. Priya hadn't mentioned it to anyone at school. There had been no reason to. By the time the bell rang, I had a loose, sick feeling in my stomach that I couldn't explain. I knew something was wrong in a specific way, not a scary movie kind of wrong, but the world is slightly miscalibrated kind of wrong. Like a picture hung 1 degree off level that you can't stop noticing. In the hallway afterward, 6 of us ended up standing in a loose cluster without really planning to. We compared what she'd said to each of us. Every single person had a version of the same story. Something she'd known that she shouldn't have known. Something small, specific, and private, the kind of detail that doesn't exist in a file, that can't be found on a form, that lives only in homes and quiet conversations and the interior of families. We went to the front office during lunch. The secretary looked up our class period, our room number, our teacher's name. She said there was no substitute assigned to our class that day. Said our regular teacher had come in and covered his own period, according to the records. We stood there. I remember the specific quality of the silence, the way it felt like the floor had shifted slightly without moving. Tobias described the woman. Cardigan, reading glasses on a cord, manila folder with a metal clasp. The secretary listened with this expression that wasn't dismissive exactly, more like carefully neutral, and when Tobias finished she said very evenly, "You might be misremembering. Not you're wrong. Not that strange. Just you might be misremembering." We went back the next day and asked a different staff member, someone who worked the front desk in the afternoons. Same answer, same tone, same careful neutrality. I want to be precise about something because I've told this story before and people always focus on the wrong part. The frightening thing was never the name she used. The name was startling. It was the thing that woke me up to the wrongness, but it wasn't the horror. The horror was the folder. She pulled that attendance sheet from the manila folder. Printed sheet, with names on it, and she had moved through every name without hesitation or mispronunciation, including names that even our regular teacher took 2 weeks to get right. And on that sheet, apparently, was not just our names but whatever else she knew. She was reading from something. There was a document. Somewhere, someone had put that document together. The substitute herself, whoever or whatever she was, might have been nothing more than a delivery mechanism. The thing that should keep you up at night isn't her. It's the folder. It's whoever compiled it. It's the fact that someone, at some point, sat down and collected those details, private names, sick dogs, grandmothers flying in from overseas, and put them in a file, and then sent her to us. I'm in my late 20s now. I've moved twice, changed jobs, lost touch with most of the people from that class. But a few years ago, I got a message from Priya. We hadn't spoken in almost a decade. She tracked me down through a mutual contact, and the message was short. She just wanted to know if I still thought about that Tuesday. She didn't explain why she was asking. She didn't need to. I wrote back the same day. I told her yes, I still thought about it. I told her I'd never found an explanation. I asked if she had. She said she'd spent a while trying. She'd looked up substitute teacher records, contacted the district office once years later under the guise of a school project, asked around. She never found a name. She never found a record of anyone matching the description being assigned to any class in our school that semester. She also told me something she'd never mentioned at the time. She said that when the substitute reached her during attendance, before saying her name, the woman had looked at her for just a moment longer than everyone else. And then she'd smiled. Not widely, just slightly, like she was pleased to see her specifically. Priya said it was the kind of smile that made her feel like she'd been expected. I've turned that over in my mind more times than I can count. The smile, the folder, the name my mother gave me in a quiet moment when I was 3 years old. Sitting in a kitchen that woman had never been inside, spoken in a voice she had never heard. I don't know who she was. I don't know what she wanted. I don't know what was in the rest of that folder or how thick it was or how many names. But I think about the fact that she came once on a Tuesday in November and she never came back. She said what she said. She did what she did. And then she left and the school said she was never there, and the records agreed, and the world closed back up around the whole thing like water over a stone. Whatever the visit was for, it felt finished. That's the part that stays with me most. Not the fear of what she knew. The certainty that she'd gotten what she came for. The door opened. The class was real. I have the notes to prove it. That's the part nobody believes. Not the room, not the teacher, not the fact that I sat in that class for 45 minutes and wrote down an assignment that I still cannot explain. They always focus on the impossibility of the room. But the notes exist. I've looked at them 100 times. The handwriting at the bottom, the assignment, the page numbers, the due date is not mine. I did not write it. I was sitting at that desk. I was holding that pen, and whatever is written at the bottom of that page did not come from my hand. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I was 14, brand new to the school. My family had moved in late September, which is the worst possible time to transfer. After all, the social arrangements have already been made and every class has already found its rhythm and the teachers have already learned which students need watching. You come in at that point and you are invisible in the particular way that only new students understand, not ignored, just not yet seen. Placeholder. A name on a revised seating chart. The school was large. The kind of large that felt intentional, like the building had been designed to disorient. Wide identical corridors branching off into more identical corridors. Room numbers that didn't follow any logic I could find. Staircases that led out on different floors depending on which end you used. I'd gotten turned around 3 times on the first day alone, and a teacher had twice redirected me without making eye contact, pointing vaguely and moving on. My schedule said second period, English. Room 14. Teacher, Mr. Voss. On the first day, I found it by accident. I'd followed a group of students down a corridor I hadn't been down before, past the gym, past a set of double doors propped open with a brick, left at a water fountain with a handwritten out-of-order sign taped above the basin. Second door on the right. The room was there. Plain door, the same as every other door in the building. Narrow vertical window panel, metal handle, room number in adhesive letters that were starting to peel at the corners. 1 and 4. Pushed it open. Mr. Voss was already at the front of the room. He was tall, noticeably tall, the kind where you register it immediately, wearing a corduroy jacket the color of dark mustard, with a small enamel pin on the lapel that I couldn't make out from the back of the room. He had a habit, I noticed within the first 5 minutes, of clicking his pen exactly 3 times before he started talking. Not twice, not 4 times. 3 deliberate clicks, a short pause, and then he spoke. He did it every single time, before taking attendance, before starting a new point, before answering a question. 3 clicks. It had the quality of a ritual. The class felt normal. Not normal in the way I was searching for normal desperately the way new students do, but genuinely, unremarkably normal. 20-something students in various states of attention. A room that smelled faintly of dry erase marker and the particular dusty warmth of a heating vent working too hard. Someone near the window had a water bottle that kept squeaking when they repositioned it. The desk I sat in had something carved into the upper right corner. I never looked closely enough to read it. We did a first-day exercise. Mr. Voss asked us to write 3 sentences. 1 true thing about ourselves, 1 thing we believed that most people didn't, and 1 question we'd stopped expecting an answer to. He didn't collect them. He said they were just to get us thinking. He walked slowly between the rows while we wrote, hands behind his back, not reading over shoulders, just moving the way a person moves when they're thinking about something other than the room they're in. Before the bell, he gave us an assignment. Finish chapter 4 of the summer reading text. Be ready to discuss the idea of the unreliable narrator. He wrote the page numbers on the board. Copied them down. I went back the next morning. I want to describe what happened carefully, because the details matter and I've had years to think about which details are actually strange and which ones my memory has distorted with repetition. I turned left at the water fountain. The out-of-order sign was gone. The water fountain looked like it had always worked, the basin clean, no tape residue on the wall above it. I registered this but didn't stop on it. Second door on the right. I opened it. Metal shelving units, floor to ceiling. Cardboard boxes stacked 3 deep on most of the shelves. Some labeled in permanent marker, textbooks, filing, gym overflow, lost and found 2019. A single bare bulb fixture on the ceiling, off. The room was maybe a third of the size of the classroom I'd sat in the day before. It smelled of cardboard and something faintly chemical, like old laminate. I stood in the doorway for what felt like a long time. I went back down the corridor. I retraced every step, past the double doors, past the gym, back to the main hallway and then back again. I did it twice, slowly, checking the room numbers I passed. They went 11, 12, a door marked staff only, then 15. No 13, no 14. The adhesive letters on the storage room door said nothing. The door was unmarked. I stood in the hall and opened my binder to the notes from the day before. The notes were there. 2 pages, my handwriting, the usual first-day information, nothing unusual. And then, at the bottom of the second page, the assignment. Page numbers. Due date. And below that, in handwriting that was not mine. Slightly smaller, slightly slanted to the left, written in a different pen. A single line I hadn't noticed before. The unreliable narrator doesn't lie. They simply don't know what they don't know. I don't know when that was written. I don't know whose handwriting it is. I've compared it to every writing sample I've collected since: friends, roommates, family members, old teachers. Nothing matches. I went to the front office. The woman at the desk looked at my schedule, looked at the room number, and told me what I've already told you, that room numbers in this building jumped from 12 to 15, that there had never been a room 14, that this had been the case since the building opened in 1987. She said it the way people say things that have been said many times before, without irritation, without particular interest. I asked about Mr. Voss. She turned to her computer, typed something, looked at the screen for a moment. She said there was no teacher by that name in the system, current or past. I described him: the corduroy jacket, the pen clicking, the enamel pin, the height. She looked at me with an expression I've tried to classify ever since. It wasn't disbelief. It wasn't concern. It wasn't the careful neutrality of someone hiding something. It was something more like tired patience. Like someone who had been asked a question they couldn't answer for so long that they'd stopped being unsettled by not having an answer. She said, "Honey, sometimes the first week is a lot." I found the senior who'd given me directions on the first day, or someone I was fairly certain was him, same jacket, same general area of the building. I asked if he remembered pointing me toward room 14. He looked at me blankly. Not defensive, not evasive, just genuinely unrecognizing. He said he didn't know where room 14 was. He said he was pretty sure there was no room 14. Here is what I keep returning to years later when I try to approach this with whatever logic I have. 20-something students were in that room. I did not imagine them. I remember specific things: the water bottle that squeaked, the carved desk corner, a girl near the front who kept tucking the same strand of hair behind her ear and having it fall forward again. I remember the quality of the afternoon light through the windows, which faced west based on where the sun was sitting. A storage room on that side of the building would face west too. The light would be the same. I've thought about that a lot. The light being the same. What I cannot explain, and I want to be precise here because imprecision is how these stories become something they're not. What I genuinely cannot explain is the handwriting. My notes exist. The first 2 pages are mine. The line at the bottom is not. It was not there when I wrote the assignment down, or I would have noticed it. It was there the next morning when I opened the binder. Someone wrote in my notes between one day and the next. I still have the binder. I moved it from my childhood bedroom to my first apartment, from there to the place I'm in now. It's in a box in my closet with other things I can't explain why I've kept. I've taken it out maybe 4 or 5 times over the years, and each time I open to that page and look at the line, I have the same thought, the one that occurs to me before anything else. The unreliable narrator doesn't lie. They simply don't know what they don't know. I've never decided whether that was meant as a comfort or a warning. I've never decided whether it was meant for me specifically, or whether it would have ended up in anyone's notebook. I've never decided which possibility is worse. I thought it was just a child's imagination. I stopped thinking that in October. My first classroom was in a small town that had 1 gas station, 1 Baptist church, and a school that smelled permanently of industrial floor cleaner and old crayons. I had 22 third graders. I was 23 years old. I had lesson plans laminated in a binder and an enthusiasm that hadn't yet learned what it was up against. He sat at the table nearest the window. Not by choice, I assigned seats alphabetically and his last name put him there. But looking back, it seems like he was always meant to be next to that glass, always looking slightly past wherever he was supposed to be looking. He was quiet in the way that makes adults uncomfortable. Not sad quiet, not troubled quiet in any obvious sense. He participated when called on. He turned in his work. He ate lunch with 2 other boys, and I'd hear them talking about cartoons, normal small boy things. But he had a quality of stillness to him that I never quite got used to, like he was waiting for something the rest of us couldn't perceive. The drawings started in September. Every Friday we had free art time after lunch. The other children drew houses, dogs, their families in front of cars. One girl spent 3 consecutive Fridays on what she explained was a detailed portrait of her guinea pig. Normal things. Sweet things. He drew the same picture every week. At first I didn't notice. The first Friday, I glanced at his paper and saw trees. A dark tree line at the bottom of the page, rendered with the focused intensity children bring to things that matter to them. I remember thinking he had a good eye for proportion. The trees were real-looking in a way that kid drawings often aren't. Behind them, a pale smudged sky. Nothing else. The second Friday, the same trees. I paid slightly more attention this time. Same composition, same placement on the page. I asked him what he was drawing. "The trees," he said, and went back to his work. The third Friday, I watched him more carefully. He drew the tree line first, then the sky. Then he added something I hadn't noticed in the earlier versions, or hadn't let myself notice. A shape among the trees. At the edge of the tree line, slightly set back, just at the point where the darkness between the trunks begins to resolve into something or refuses to. A vertical shape. Pale. Thin. Facing forward. I asked him what that was, pointing at the shape. He looked at me with the patient expression children use when they think adults are being slow. "The person," he said. "The person watching." I told myself it was imagination. Every child that age has a vivid one, and the ones who are quiet often have the most elaborate inner lives. I wrote a note in my little teacher's journal, the one I kept that year, more for my own processing than anything else. Something like, "He draws the same trees every week, interesting, watch this." I wrote it with a certain clinical distance that made me feel professional. But here's what I didn't write down, because writing it down would have made it more real than I wanted it to be. The shape in his drawing did not look like a child's invention. It looked like something he was transcribing. The way a child draws something they've seen 100 times. The slightly worn quality of a subject rendered from deep familiarity, not imagination. It had that. October came. The days got shorter and the afternoon light through his window took on that particular amber quality that only exists in the South in autumn, low and thick, turning the schoolyard into something out of a painting. He kept drawing. Every Friday the same trees. Every Friday the same pale shape at the edge of them. I started looking at the tree line. Our school backed up against about 40 yards of schoolyard and then a dense stretch of pines. It was a property boundary, technically. The land behind it belonged to a family that had farmed it once and didn't anymore. The trees were old enough that there wasn't much undergrowth, just columns of bark going up into dark canopy. During recess, the children played toward the front of the yard and generally didn't go near the tree line. It was one of those unspoken rules children maintain without being told. Some spaces just communicate a preference for being left alone. I told myself I was looking at the trees because I was curious about the drawings. What was he seeing there that he kept trying to put on paper? Some quality of the light? The way the pines stood close together, creating the illusion of depth? I told myself that. The afternoon it stopped being a thing I could file away came on a Thursday, not even a Friday, not even during art time. We were having an ordinary afternoon. I was standing by the window while the children worked on a math worksheet, looking out at the yard in the way teachers do when they're watching for nothing in particular, just maintaining general awareness. The yard was empty. It was getting late, maybe 40 minutes before dismissal. The amber light was doing its thing to the grass, turning it colors that grass doesn't usually turn. The tree line was dark against it, the pines holding their shadows close. There was someone standing at the edge, just at the point where the yard ended and the trees began, in the same position that appeared in his drawings every week. Upright, still, facing the building. Too far away for me to make out a face. Too still, even against the wind that was moving the grass slightly and lifting some leaves near the edge of the playground. I looked immediately at my class. The children were bent over their worksheets. He was working too, pencil moving, not looking up. He hadn't glanced toward the window. He didn't need to. I looked back at the tree line. The figure was still there. I stood at that window for what felt like a long time but was probably 30 seconds. The figure did not move in any way that I could detect. Did not raise a hand or shift their weight or do any of the small unconscious things that standing people do. Just stood, facing the building, at the precise location he had been documenting in his drawings since the first week of school. I looked away because a child asked me a question about the worksheet. When I looked back, the tree line was empty. I want to tell you I immediately reported it. I want to tell you I was efficient and professional and did what should be done. What I actually did was stay very calm through the remaining 35 minutes of school, dismiss my class, and then sit at my desk for a long time without moving, looking at his latest drawing, which I had taken from the pile to mark and had never given back. Still sitting there in the middle of my desk where I'd been reviewing work. The pale shape at the tree line, facing forward. The more I sat with it, the more I understood that I had been given weekly documentation of something for 2 months. He had been drawing it faithfully, in good faith, the way children report the world as they find it. It had not occurred to him, I think, that this was something to hide or protect anyone from. It was simply there, and he drew what was there. I did speak to the principal. I did it carefully because I was a first-year teacher and very aware of how I might sound. I said I'd noticed a figure at the tree line. She listened, asked a few questions, said she'd make sure the custodial staff checked the perimeter. She had the manner of someone managing a nervous new teacher, which is perhaps what I was. Nothing official was filed. Nothing changed in any visible way. He kept drawing. November, December. The same trees. The same shape. I left teaching at the end of that year, though for reasons that had nothing to do with him or what I saw. I moved back north, started a different career, lived the ordinary accumulating life that carries you forward. I didn't think about it constantly, but it never became one of those memories that smooths out with distance and eventually just becomes a story you tell. There were nights in apartments in other cities when I'd wake up and know, the way you know things in that early morning clarity before the day rebuilds its sensible structures, that I'd been dreaming about those trees. Not about the figure, just the trees, and the light, and the feeling of standing at a window looking at something you couldn't explain but that was unmistakably looking back. I drove past the school once, years later, on a trip back south to see someone. Just to drive past it. I told myself I was just in the neighborhood, which was true enough. The school looks the same. The yard looks the same. The tree line is still there. I passed it at about 30 miles an hour and I didn't slow down. I didn't look at it for long. I found the file on a Monday morning in late November, 3 weeks after everything had already happened. That detail matters. By the time I understood what I was looking at, the investigation had been handed to people with badges and jurisdiction and the particular flat effect of professionals who have seen this category of thing before. My role, by that point, was to answer questions and make copies. But I kept thinking about the file, about the form inside it, about the ink. Let me go back. The way our front office worked. Every enrolled student had a physical folder in the cabinet behind my desk. Green folders, alphabetical, fat with the accumulated paperwork of a school year, immunization records, emergency contacts, allergy forms, the consent slips for picture day and field trips. I had been maintaining those folders for 11 years. I knew every child's file the way you know a route you've driven so many times you stop seeing it consciously. He came every Friday at 2:40. That's 20 minutes before the final bell, which is when we allowed early pickups. Enough time for the child to be called from class, collect their things, and be signed out before the hallway traffic started. He was always on time. He was always pleasant. He knew her name, her teacher's name, her classroom number. He knew her teacher had recently changed rooms because of the mold issue in the East Corridor, which meant he'd known before some of the parents on our official notification list had gotten around to reading their emails. I never questioned any of it. That's the part one have to sit with. He signed the early pickup log each Friday in the same slightly forward-leaning handwriting. He knew to show ID without being asked. Not everyone does. He waited at the window with the patient, unhurried manner of someone who had done this many times and expected it to go smoothly, because it always had. He made small talk about the weather twice. Once he brought a coffee from the gas station on Route 9 and held it the whole time in a way that made him look like a parent running errands on a workday, which is exactly what he looked like. I thought of him as her uncle, I realized, though I couldn't have told you why. He had that quality. Familiar. No, the word for it is authorized. But the feeling of it was warmer than that. He felt like someone who belonged in the story. The mother called on a Wednesday. She called to ask about the attendance policy because her daughter had been sick since the previous Thursday. A stomach thing that had kept her home 5 days, possibly more if she wasn't better by the weekend. She wanted to make sure the absences were being recorded as excused. She was brisk and practical, the way working parents of elementary schoolers often are, efficient with their minutes. I pulled up the attendance record while she was talking. Her daughter had been marked present the previous Friday. I want to describe the feeling of that moment accurately, because I've thought about it many times since, and I think accuracy is the only thing I can offer. It wasn't alarm. Not immediately. It was a very specific variety of confusion, the kind that the brain produces when it receives information that cannot be processed by any existing category. The sensation of a shape that doesn't fit any slot you have for it. I actually thought for about 4 seconds that I had the wrong record open. I checked the name. I checked the grade. I checked the teacher. Her daughter had been marked present last Friday. Her daughter had been homesick since the previous Thursday. The mother was still talking about the attendance policy. I told her I'd look into it and call her back. I used my professional voice, the one that has a decade of practice in it, the one that does not let what I'm thinking into the telephone. I hung up and I sat for a moment, and then I pulled the early pickup log. He had signed her out at 2:43 the previous Friday. I have a system. This is something I want to explain because it matters. I have a system, and the system had worked for 11 years. And the system said that I verify the emergency contact form before releasing a child to anyone I don't recognize personally. He had come for 9 Fridays. By the 3rd Friday, I knew his face. By the 5th, I knew his handwriting in the log. The verification check by Friday 9 had become a kind of gesture, the form pulled halfway out and then replaced, a formality in the same category as asking someone whose name you know how to spell their name. I verified him the way you verify things you have already decided are true. Pulled her file. The emergency contact form was a standard 2-page document. Mother's name and 3 contact numbers at the top, in her handwriting, in blue ballpoint, the slightly hurried print of someone filling out school paperwork at a kitchen table. Secondary emergency contact, father, same handwriting. Below that, the authorized pickup list. His name was 3rd on the list. I know with the certainty I have about the routes I've driven and the files I've maintained and the things I've done the same way for 11 years, I know that form went into that folder in August with 2 contacts on it. A mother and a father. I know this the way I know my own handwriting from someone else's. I know it without being able to prove it, which is the particular torture of this kind of knowing. His name was written in the same blue ballpoint as the rest of the form. The letters matched the general style of the document. But ink is a physical thing. It sits on paper with a weight that changes depending on when it was put there. The ink at the top of that form was 11 weeks old. The ink of his name was not. You can't prove that in a way that stands up to anything. I understand that. I'm not a forensic examiner. I'm a school secretary who has handled paper for 11 years and knows, in the wordless physical way of any long practice, when something is recently laid down versus long settled. That's not evidence. It's just what I know. I called the principal first, then the police. Not the other order, which I've since been told would have been better. The principal called the mother, who produced a sound I am not going to try to describe. The police asked me to secure the log and the file and not to make additional copies until they arrived. I sat at my desk with the cabinet drawer open and her green folder in my hands, and I thought about 9 Fridays. 9 Fridays in which he walked to the window, already knowing the answer to every question I might ask, already on the list. 9 Fridays in which I handed a child through the system like a system that was working correctly. The investigators were good at their jobs. That much I can say. What they found and what happened after became a matter that existed in a different room from me, a room with jurisdiction and procedure and official language that I was not in. I gave my statement twice. I was thanked for my cooperation. She was found. I was told that much and told it was a good outcome, and told it carefully enough that I understood there were components of it that were not a good outcome, and that I was not going to be told about those components. I filed a report with my administration about the verification procedure. We now require ID every time, regardless of familiarity. We now require a phone call to the primary contact for any early pickup that falls outside the established weekly pattern. These are good policies. I helped write them. I think about what they would have looked like in August, before the folders were assigned and the forms were filed and someone decided that a list was a thing that could be quietly revised. I still work in that front office. This will surprise some people who hear the story and decide they know how it ends for me. I don't sleep well, but I didn't sleep well before either. I am precise about the procedures in a way that I was not precise before. I pull the form every time. I look at the ink. I went back to that file once, after the investigation closed and the documents were returned to us pending any legal proceedings. I opened her green folder and I looked at his name on that form for a long time. The third entry on the authorized pickup list. Written in a hand careful enough to pass. In ink recently enough laid down that the page held it slightly differently, a weight you can feel more than see, the difference between something old and something pretending to be. I don't know when it was changed. I don't know how someone got access to the cabinet. I don't know how long it was planned, how early the planning started, what was known about our procedures and our habits and my specific tendency by the 9th week to verify with my eyes rather than my hands. I think about the coffee from the gas station on Route 9, the patients at the window, the prior knowledge of the classroom change that hadn't reached all the parents yet. I think about the fact that all of it, every Friday, every signature, every small piece of performed familiarity had to begin somewhere. Someone looked at how we worked and decided it was workable. Decided that 11 years of good procedure, in the hands of someone who'd learned to trust the system she'd built, was a kind of door. The form is gone now in an evidence box somewhere. I still have my memory of it. The ink, the weight of it, the difference between something that has always been there and something that only needed to look that way. I recognized her before I knew her name. That should have been the first sign. The thing about returning to a place you grew up in is that your body remembers it differently than your mind does. Your mind has done the work of growing up and moving on and building a self that exists elsewhere now. But your body still knows the width of those hallways, still adjusts its pace to the particular linoleum, still expects certain smells at certain corners. Walking back into that building for my practicum felt like putting on a coat I'd outgrown. Familiar in every seam, wrong in every proportion. I was 22. I had been a student there 4 years earlier. Now I was the one standing at the front of the room, or close enough to the front that the distinction mattered more to me than it did to anyone else. My supervising teacher gave me the second week to start leading portions of the class. 11th grade English. 16 and 17-year-olds who were not particularly impressed by me, which was fair. I was close enough to their age that my authority had to be performed rather than assumed, and performing authority in a room where you once sat on the other side of the desk requires a specific kind of internal negotiation that nobody warned me about in my methods course. The class had 24 students. I learned most of their faces by the second day. I had been told this was a skill, learning faces quickly, and I was proud of it in the small way you're proud of professional competencies when you're new to a profession. She sat in the back left corner. I noticed her the way you notice something that doesn't quite resolve when you look at it directly. Not wrong exactly, just resistant to the ordinary process of categorization that the brain runs on new faces. I filed her away and kept going with the lesson. That evening in my car before I drove home, I sat for a moment with the engine running and tried to locate the feeling. I was good with faces. I'd looked at her and felt not the blankness of an unknown face but something more like the static of a signal I almost recognized. The way a song sounds familiar before you can place it. The way a word sits on the tip of the tongue with a shape but no sound yet. I told myself it was nothing. She was a student. She had one of those faces. The second week I started leading discussion. She participated twice, thoughtful observations, the kind that come from students who have read carefully and thought about it before class. I called on her by name, which I found in the grade book. An ordinary name. Nothing distinctive, but something about the way she sat, the way she held her pen, the jacket she wore, a particular dark green quilted jacket, the kind with the slightly oversized collar. I kept not looking at her directly and then looking the way you do with something bright. On Thursday of the second week, I was erasing the board after class and she was the last student out. She paused at the door. "You used to eat lunch on the east steps," she said. Not a question. Not the tentative opener of a student trying to connect with a teacher. A statement offered flatly, the way you state a thing, you know. I turned around. She was already leaving. I stood at the board with the eraser in my hand and thought about it carefully, the way you think about something when some part of you already knows it needs to be thought about carefully. I had eaten lunch on the East Steps senior year, with 2 other girls for most of the year. It was not a particularly notable thing to do, but it was specific. She was a transfer student. My supervisor had mentioned it in passing. First week of semester, the usual logistical noting, we have a new transfer in 3rd period. She's settling in well. Transfer from a school 40 minutes away. She had never attended this school. She could not have watched me eat lunch on the East Steps 4 years ago. Here is what I thought standing at that board. She must have heard it from someone. Maybe she knew one of the girls I ate with. High school social networks extend in directions you can't trace. Someone described me to her before I arrived for my practicum, and she was making a connection, showing she knew something the way teenagers sometimes do to establish a kind of casual power. It was fine. It was explicable. I almost left it there. What stopped me wasn't logic. It was the jacket. The dark green quilted jacket with the oversized collar. I had seen that jacket before. Not on her, not recently. In the specific and textually detailed way you remember things from 4 years ago that imprinted for no obvious reason. A face at the periphery, a jacket in a hallway, the particular way someone stood near the water fountain by the east stairwell and watched the passing traffic without being part of it. I had seen that jacket in this building. When I was a senior and she would have been a freshman. I told myself I was confusing her with someone else. The following week I watched her more carefully, which I'm aware is a strange thing to admit about a student. Not in any way I let show. I was professionally present and evenly distributed in my attention, I think. But in the way that you monitor something you are trying to understand. She was unremarkable in most senses. She turned in her work. She answered when called on. She did not seem to notice my attention, or if she did, it didn't alter her behavior in the way that being watched usually alters the behavior of 16-year-olds. On Wednesday she wore the green jacket again. I made a note in my phone. I don't know exactly why. It felt important to record the fact rather than let it sit in memory where I might later doubt it. On Friday she said something in discussion about the assigned reading, something about the way the narrator couldn't trust her own memory of events, and she looked at me when she said it. Not the way students look at teachers to gauge reaction. The way you look at someone to make sure they understood you. I drove home that night thinking about the water fountain by the east stairwell. I had boxes in my childhood bedroom, the ones that hadn't been worth bringing to my college apartment. School things mostly. Old notebooks, awards, the debris of a self I'd finished with. My yearbooks were in there. I found the one from my senior year first. I looked at myself in the senior portraits, the slightly formal expression everyone has in those photos, the attempt at adult composure, and felt the distance of 4 years, which is a specific distance, close enough to see clearly and far enough to be strange. Then I found the freshman section. I turned pages with the careful speed of someone who has a thing they're looking for and isn't sure they want to find it. The freshman portraits were organized alphabetically. I found her section. She was there. Same face. Same specific quality of stillness in the eyes. The photo was 4 years old, taken when she would have been 14, in a building 40 minutes away where she had presumably been enrolled as a freshman that year. But here she was, in this yearbook, in the row where the alphabetical order put her, in the small rectangle of portrait standard lighting, looking at the camera. And then I turned the page because there were more pages to turn, and I don't know what I expected to find or not find. It was a candid, full page of them, the ones the yearbook committee puts together of daily life. Students at lunch, students in the hallway, the homecoming assembly, ordinary captured moments that were meant to be the texture of the year rather than its official record. I was in one of them, the East Steps, a Tuesday or Wednesday in autumn. By the quality of the light, that particular low amber I still associate with the back half of the year. I was sitting slightly apart from the other girls, facing slightly away, not looking at the camera. Not looking at anything in particular. The photo was taken from a position that would have placed the photographer at the edge of the building, near the corner, slightly elevated. The angle was specific enough that I could reconstruct it. Whoever took it was not participating in any of the social activity in the frame. They were positioned to watch and to capture the watching. There was no photographer credit. The yearbook committee photos had no individual credits. I closed the yearbook and sat with it on my lap in the dark of my childhood bedroom for a while. I've thought since then about what it means that she said it the way she did. Not "I heard you used to eat lunch out there," or even a question about it. A statement, plain and informative, offered in the tone of someone returning a fact to its owner. "You used to eat lunch on the East Steps." As if she were telling me something about myself that I might have forgotten. As if the information were hers to give. The photo is still in the yearbook. I still have the yearbook. I've looked at it since, more than once, with the particular and slightly sick feeling of looking at something that doesn't belong in the category it occupies. She was watching me 4 years before I walked back into that building. I don't know what she was waiting to see. I don't know if the practicum, the return, was a coincidence that she shaped into something, or whether there was shaping of a different and longer kind happening before I knew to look for it. I don't know if the transfer was a transfer. I finished the semester. I was professional about it. I said nothing because I had nothing that could be said. She turned in all her work. She passed the class. I never went back to that school. There were 31 of us in that room. Every single one of us put down our pencils. That's the part one keep coming back to. Not the sound itself, though I'll get to the sound, but the unanimity of that moment. 31 teenagers in a standardized testing environment, which is about as controlled and surveilled a human situation as exists outside of a courtroom, and every single one of us stopped at the same instant. No one looked around first to see if it was okay to react. No one waited for social permission. We all just stopped. Together. The way you stop when something overrides the part of the brain that monitors what other people are doing. I've talked to people since who weren't there. The ones who want a rational explanation always start with the HVAC system. Old buildings make sounds, they say. Pipes expand and contract. Air moves through ducts in ways that produce tonal frequencies. All of that is true. I am not an unreasonable person, and I don't offer this story as proof of anything. But the HVAC system explanation requires you to believe that 31 people, separately and simultaneously, interpreted a mechanical frequency as a child crying. It requires you to believe we all heard the same misidentification at the same moment and responded to it identically. You're welcome to believe that. I'm just telling you what it sounded like. It sounded like a child. Small, maybe 4 or 5 years old by the pitch of it. Crying in the particular way that children cry when they have been crying for a long time. Not the sharp immediate cry of a new hurt, but the ragged, exhausted sound of sustained distress. The kind that breaks something in an adult who hears it because it means the child has been at it long enough to lose the sharp edge and settle into the terrible patience of not being found. It was coming from inside the east wall. The room we were testing in was on the east side of the building. I had taken that particular standardized test in that particular room twice before, sophomore year, junior year, and I knew the room the way you know a room you've spent hours in. Beige walls, fluorescent strips overhead, the proctor's desk at the front with a coffee thermos that was always present and apparently never emptied. The east wall had 2 windows, both with the blinds drawn per testing protocol, and between them a stretch of plain painted concrete block that had always been exactly what it appeared to be. The sound came from inside that wall. Not from behind it, from outside the building. From inside the wall itself, which is structurally a concrete block exterior. Solid, filled, no cavity significant enough to hold what we were hearing. The proctor stood up. She was a woman in her 50s who had been proctoring these exams for what I understood to be a long time, and she had the manner of someone who had seen most varieties of student disruption and was not interested in any of them. She stood up and she looked at the east wall and she didn't say anything for about 10 seconds. Then she told us to continue with our exams. Nobody moved. She said it again with the specific added authority of the second repetition, and slowly, one by one, we picked up our pencils. But I looked around that room before I looked back at my test, and I want to record what I saw because I think it matters. Not one face was skeptical. You know the face people make when they think a sound has a normal explanation. The slight relaxation of the brow, the small private nod of dismissal. Not one person in that room was wearing that face. Every face I saw was doing something else entirely. We finished the exam. Nobody spoke about it in the room. The protocol held, The way protocol does when the alternative is acknowledging something you don't have language for. In the hallway afterward, it was different. I found out later that 2 other testing rooms had also gone quiet around the same time, but in those rooms not everyone had heard the same thing. A few students in each, a handful, not the unanimous response we'd had. Which made our room notable, though notable to whom and for what purpose I wasn't sure. Word got around the way word gets around in a school. By the end of the day, it was the kind of story that had already begun the process of becoming legend, the accumulated distortions of 100 retellings already starting to accrete. I was in the room, so I stopped following the versions that weren't mine. What I did instead was look into the building. This is the part that took a few weeks. It wasn't organized research. I was 17, not a historian, but I had a particular stubbornness about unanswered things, and I had access to the school library's database subscription for newspaper archives, which I used mainly for history papers but which turned out to have other applications. Our high school was built in 1994. Before the high school, the land had held an elementary school, a different building, demolished when the district consolidated and built the new campus. The elementary school had been there since the early 1970s. I found that easily enough in the district's own published history on their website, the kind of institutional document that lists construction dates and enrollment figures and the names of principals and contains, if you read it, very little actual history. The fire I found in the archive. March 1987. A Friday afternoon, late, after most students and staff had already left for the day. The fire started in the east wing of the elementary school. This detail, the east wing, produced a feeling I am not going to try to be dramatic about. I just sat with it for a moment and then kept reading. The article was brief. A fire in the east wing, contained before it spread to the rest of the building, cause under investigation. The school closed for 2 weeks for repairs. 1 paragraph. I went looking for follow-up coverage the way you follow a thread, clicking through dates in the weeks after. I found one more article, published 10 days later, which reported that the cause had been determined to be an electrical fault in the East Wing utility corridor. The school would reopen the following Monday. Students and parents were thanked for their patience. No casualties mentioned in either article. I should have stopped there. No casualties, electrical fault, building repaired and reopened. Clean. But something in the flatness of both articles bothered me. The way they described the situation with a completeness that somehow felt like it was covering less ground than the words suggested. I had written enough history papers to know that absence in a source is not the same as absence in the record. I went deeper into the archive, which required logging in with my student credentials and accessing a regional newspaper database that most students used only when they absolutely had to. I searched the school's name. I searched the fire date with different terms. I searched the district name and the year. I found a third article. It was from a smaller regional paper, a county-level weekly that had apparently covered local news more granularly than the city paper. Published 2 weeks after the fire. It was mostly a community update, repair timeline, enrollment logistics, reassurance from the superintendent. Standard. But there was a paragraph near the end. 1 paragraph, 6 sentences, and then the article moved on. The paragraph said, in the measured language of a reporter who had clearly been given limited access to information, that the district was working to reconcile its attendance records from the afternoon of the fire. The phrasing was specific enough to mean something and vague enough to mean many things. It noted that after-hours access to the East Wing on the afternoon of the fire had been used by a small number of students participating in a remedial tutoring program that met on Friday afternoons. It said the district was in the process of confirming the whereabouts of all students enrolled in that program and was cooperating with the relevant authorities. Then the article moved on to something about the repair contractors. I searched for a 4th article. I searched for a week's worth of subsequent issues of that county paper. I searched the city paper for any follow-up on attendance reconciliation or the tutoring program or the relevant authorities. I found nothing. Not a correction, not a follow-up, not a resolution. The thread ended there, in the middle of a paragraph in a weekly county paper from 1987, with the district in the process of confirming the whereabouts of children whose names I did not have and could not find. Official records say no casualties. The official records also end before the confirming was confirmed. I printed the 3rd article and I've kept it. I don't know what it proves. I know what it suggests in the way that an incomplete sentence suggests by ending where it does. I know that the east wing of an elementary school that once stood on this ground had a fire on a Friday afternoon in March, and that there were children in that wing, and that 2 weeks later a reporter wrote one paragraph about whereabouts being confirmed and then the story stopped producing new paragraphs. I know that we were testing in a room on the east side of a building that was built on the footprint of that school. I know what 31 people heard, and I know what it sounded like, and I know that not one of us in that room made the face people make when they think a sound has a normal explanation. The exam results came back 6 weeks later. I passed. Most people did. Nobody ever did anything official with what happened in that room. I asked around quietly, checked if the proctor had filed anything, if the administration had been notified formally. As far as I could find, nothing was written down. Some things apparently don't make it into the official record. That part, at least, I already knew. She said his name the same way she always did, like he was still supposed to be there. I need to explain what kind of teacher she was before I explain what she did, because the two things are connected in a way that matters. She had been teaching AP history at that school for longer than most of us had been alive. She was the kind of teacher who remembered the siblings of former students, who kept a jar of hard candies on her desk that nobody ever touched because taking one felt presumptuous, who called roll from memory rather than the printed sheet because she said she learned names better that way. She was precise. She was consistent. In 2 years of her class, I had never seen her misplace a date, mispronounce a name, or lose the thread of a lesson. She was one of those teachers who made you feel, when you were in her room, that the subject had genuine weight and that she was letting you in on something real. He had sat 2 rows to my left and 1 seat back. Present tense feels wrong, but past tense feels like a choice I'm not ready to have made for me, which is maybe part of what this story is about. He died on a Wednesday night in the 3rd week of October. A car accident on the county road that runs along the reservoir, a road most of us had driven, a road with a particular curve that everyone knew about and took carefully and he apparently didn't or couldn't, or something happened that made careful irrelevant. The details arrived in fragments over the following 2 days, the way details do in a school when something happens to one of your own. By Friday, everyone knew the shape of it, even if nobody knew all of it. The school did what schools do. Grief counselors appeared in the library. An announcement was made over the intercom in the measured, careful language of administration trying to hold a container around something that doesn't fit in containers. His locker got the spontaneous memorial treatment. Photos, notes, a stuffed animal someone had apparently loved enough to leave. I walked past it every day on the way to 3rd period and I stopped looking at it after the 1st week because there's a limit to how many times you can look directly at something like that before it starts costing more than you have to spend on it. We came back to her class. That's what you do. You come back. The grief counselors said returning to routine was healthy and perhaps they were right, and perhaps healthy is not always the same as okay, but it's what you have so you use it. She didn't address it directly the first day back, which surprised some people and didn't surprise me. She was not the type to center the emotional. She nodded at his empty seat in a way that acknowledged without dwelling, and she taught the lesson, and I think most of us were grateful for the container of it even if the container felt too small. 2 weeks after the accident, on a Tuesday in early November, she called roll. This is important. She always called roll at the start of class. Every day, from memory, alphabetical, moving through the names at a steady pace, each student responding and her eyes moving to confirm. Took maybe 3 minutes. It was so consistent that it had become part of the rhythm of the period the way a clock ticking becomes part of the rhythm of a room, present but below conscious attention. She got to his name and she said it. Not differently than she'd ever said it. Not quietly, not with hesitation, not with the careful pause of someone who has decided to do something deliberate. His name, in her normal roll call voice, at the normal roll call pace, as if 2 weeks of his desk being empty had not intervened. The room did what rooms do in that situation. A specific quality of stillness, different from the ordinary inattention of a class period. The kind of stillness that comes from 30 people simultaneously deciding not to make a sound. Nobody answered. Obviously, his seat was empty. His seat had been empty for 2 weeks. She paused. Here's what I want to get right about the pause because I've replayed it many times and I think precision matters. It wasn't the pause of someone who has made a mistake and is processing it. I've seen that pause, the small flinch of self-correction, the quick recovery, the apology offered to the room. This wasn't that. It was a pause of the other kind. The kind that comes from attention, from listening, from waiting for something that the rest of us couldn't hear. She was looking at his seat. I was watching her, which I don't think she knew. I was in the third row, close enough to see her face clearly. She was looking at his seat with the expression she used when she was taking in information. Not grief. Not the soft, clouded look of someone remembering. The focused, receiving expression of someone who is present with what's in front of them. Then she looked down at the attendance book. She marked something. I saw her hand move. I want to be careful about this because I know what memory does to details it finds significant. It sharpens them, holds them with a grip that can reshape as well as preserve. But I was watching and I was close and I saw her hand move over the page in the same small motion she used when she marked a student present. The same motion, the same duration, the same return of the pen to the margin of the page. She moved on to the next name. The rest of roll call was normal. The lesson proceeded. 40 minutes of the causes and consequences of things that happened a long time ago to people who were also, eventually, gone. I took notes. The words my hand wrote made sense. I'm not sure my attention was entirely in the room for all 40 minutes. After class I waited. I was good at this, waiting without appearing to wait, taking a long time with my notebook, being the last person out in a way that looked incidental. When the room was empty, I approached her desk. I asked her about roll call. I tried to ask it gently, the way you approach something you're not sure you're allowed to touch. I said I'd noticed she had called his name. I asked if she was okay. She looked at me with an expression I have thought about many times since. Not confusion exactly. Not the blankness of someone who has no memory of what they did. Something more specific than that. The expression of someone who is deciding carefully what to offer. She said she didn't remember doing it. For words after that, she didn't remember doing it. She said it in a steady, considered way, not the way you say something you've fumbled into and want to move past, but the way you say something you've already sat with and this is the version of it you've settled on. She held my eyes while she said it. Then she thanked me for asking and looked back at her desk in a way that meant the conversation was complete. I walked out of that classroom and I stood in the hallway for a moment. Around me the ordinary traffic of a school day continued. The bells and the backpacks and the particular organized chaos of passing period. Everything exactly as it always was. I thought about what her face had looked like during the pause. The receiving expression. The quality of attention. I thought about the motion of her hand. Here is what I believe, and I want to be clear that belief is all it is. I have no recording of it, no corroboration beyond the testimony of my own observation, no way to put it in front of anyone and say, look, I believe she heard something. I believe that in the space between his name and the silence that answered it, something was present that I wasn't calibrated to perceive, that the rest of the class wasn't, that she, after decades in that room, after the accumulated practice of calling names and receiving their answers was, I believe her hand moved because she was marking what she received. I believe she knew exactly what she had done. I've thought about the alternative, which is that grief does strange things to people who have practiced certainty for a long time and that sometimes the body completes emotion before the mind has caught up. That's a real thing. That happens. I've thought about it seriously enough that I want to acknowledge I have thought about it, that I'm not dismissing it. But her face during that pause was not the face of someone whose body was running ahead of their mind. It was the face of someone paying full attention to something that required it. He would have been the first person in that class she'd ever lost. In however many years of calling roll from memory, building the rhythm of names into something close to relationship, he was the first one taken before the year was out. I think about what that does to a practice. What it means to call a roll you have always believed was complete and find it suddenly, permanently, one name short. Maybe it means you don't leave it short. I graduated that spring. She sent me a card, which she apparently did for all her seniors. A brief handwritten note, nothing personal, the kind of card you keep for a while and then let go of. I don't have it anymore. I never asked her about it again. I thought about it in the way you think about the things you decided not to pursue, with a low recurring attention, returning to it on certain kinds of quiet days, turning it over to see if it looks different from another angle. It doesn't. It looks the same from every angle. She said his name. She paused. She looked at his seat with the expression of someone receiving something. She marked the book. She told me she didn't remember doing it. One of those things is the most important thing she ever taught me. I'm still not sure which one. If these stories found something in you that you can't quite name, that quiet unease that follows you after the screen goes dark, then you already know why this channel exists. Unheard Fears isn't just a place for horror. It's a place for the things that don't have explanations yet. Subscribe, stay close, and remember, some attendance books never close.